December 3rd, 1940. Near the English coast. Midnight. From 16,000 feet above, the earth burned red like coals. Oberleutnant Karl Felsman leaned forward in his Heinkel bomber, eyes fixed on what the maps called Sheffield. Flames licked the sky. Factories, warehouses, power grids, obliterated. "Perfect strike," he murmured. The crew clapped. Another British industrial hub, gone. But below, the buildings were made of plywood. The rail yard was painted on grass. And the fires, those were lit by men named Jeffrey, not Gustav. British engineers, not British corpses. Back in Berlin, Goebbels broadcasted a victory. Felsman was promoted. He smiled at his medal and never questioned why the targets never screamed. But by spring, he would. He would learn the name Starfish, and it would haunt him forever. Fog rolled across the English Channel like a slow-moving tide. Above it, squadrons of Heinkel He 111s flew in silence. Engines throbbed low. No formation lights, no chatter, just the moon and war. Inside one of them, Oberleutnant Karl Felsman reviewed the target map. Birmingham, Sheffield, Manchester. Names he knew only as supply points on a Reich logistics chart. Each red circle meant one thing: destroy. They called it the Blitz. The British called it hell. Between September 1940 and May 1941, Germany launched over 30,000 bombing sorties against the United Kingdom. Night after night, cities vanished in flame. Factories collapsed. Homes turned to ash. The goal? Break Britain's will. Cripple her war machine. Berlin was confident. Too confident. "This is how we defeat them," said Goering. "Not with tanks. With fire." Felsman believed him. So did every young Luftwaffe crewman who kissed his Stuka, tightened his gloves, and flew into the dark. They saw themselves as modern gods, raining judgment from above. And in those early weeks, it worked. Coventry, Bristol, Southampton, entire blocks flattened, and the bombs didn't care who they killed. But then, something changed. It began small. A city would burn, but industrial output didn't drop. The Royal Air Force still had fuel, still had Spitfires. Steel production didn't dip. Shipyards that should have been rubble still launched vessels. And the resistance? It got stronger. Inside Luftwaffe command centers, reports were puzzling. Photos showed glowing fires, massive strikes. But intercepted British transmissions said otherwise. Minimal damage. Shrapnel recovered in empty fields. False targets identified. At first, the High Command dismissed it. British lies. Psychological deflection. But Felsman, he noticed the patterns. On his 6th sortie over England, he saw it. A factory with perfect rows. Too perfect. No roads led to it. No movement around it. Just fire, shadows, and silence. And yet, he dropped his payload. "Target acquired," he said. The bombs hit. The fire swelled. The silence remained. Back in the barracks, his comrades drank to another success. Another blow to the English beast. But Felsman kept remembering the light. How it shimmered, unnaturally, as if someone had arranged it. As if it was designed to be seen. He never spoke it aloud. Not yet. But in the quiet corners of his mind, the question took root. What if they want us to see it? Because in war, sometimes what you see is exactly what they want you to destroy. And in the fields of southern England, something strange was rising. It looked like a city. It burned like a city. But no one ever ran. No one ever screamed. Just flickering light, empty rail cars, and a name whispered by only a few. Inside British command. Operation Starfish. January 10th, 1941. Over a blacked-out England, the Luftwaffe returned. Oberleutnant Karl Felsman adjusted his altitude, 12,000 feet, and falling. His bomber's nose tilted slightly downward. "Approaching Hull," said the navigator. Below, the coast glittered with fire. Orange strobes, burst flares, a glow too vivid for blackout conditions. Felsman blinked. "It's lit up like a parade." The radio man chuckled. "Maybe the British want to make it easy for us." But Felsman didn't laugh. He scanned the horizon. The layout was familiar. Rail yard, oil drums, factory clusters. Only something was off. There were no moving lights, no emergency vehicles, no scattered headlights racing from explosions, just fixed points of flame, too even, too still. They dropped their payload. The bombs screamed, the fire grew, and still, no sirens, no flak, no sound but wind and metal. Back at base, pilots celebrated, but Felsman stayed quiet. He replayed the scene in his mind. He remembered how the fires stayed symmetrical, how even as the explosions rolled, nothing shifted. Not one car, not one figure running through the smoke. He pulled out a notebook, something most pilots didn't bother with, and he wrote, "Target glowed before impact. No movement observed. Fires unusually precise. Suspect false signals?" He showed it to no one, because in the Luftwaffe, doubt was weakness, and weakness didn't earn promotions. It earned silence. The next night, his wingman, Hans Ritter, flew a solo sortie over Exeter. The mission was textbook: strike the central rail yard. Hans dropped every bomb on target. But when he returned, his face was pale. In the mess hall, over cold sausage and tea, he whispered, "There were shadows, but no people. Roads with no tire tracks. Windows, painted on." Felsman nodded once. "I saw the same." They exchanged no more words, because there are some truths that, once spoken, make a man dangerous. And what they saw, what they thought they saw, was impossible. A city designed to be bombed? How could that be? Who would do such a thing? And why was it working? January faded into February. The raids continued, heavier, faster, more furious. Night after night, the sky thundered with engines. Berlin demanded results. New targets were selected: Portsmouth, Sunderland, Middlesbrough. Hit their ports, cripple their steel. Oberleutnant Felsman led 5 missions in 12 nights. Each time, the targets burned beautifully. Each time, something was wrong. On February 17th, he dropped ordnance on what should have been Sheffield's Eastern Rail Junction. But when aerial recon photos were returned, intelligence officers grew cold. Impact confirmed, but the real junction remains intact. How? 3 direct hits, 2 tons of TNT. But trains kept running. Factory outputs held steady. One officer muttered, "Impossible." Another snapped, "They must be rebuilding faster than we thought." But Felsman said nothing, because he remembered what he'd seen. A rail yard where the rails never gleamed, where the tracks didn't curve, just lines etched in earth, painted silver, and fires that erupted on cue, as if someone was waiting, watching. Meanwhile, 400 miles away, in a field outside Dorset, British engineers were lighting stage fires, drums of oil, mirrors, timed flare charges. An entire team from the Ministry of Home Security worked under the code name Q sites. They constructed starfish decoys, burning cities built to die, concrete shell buildings, false roads, even fake anti-aircraft guns, made from drain pipes and painted tarps. To the Luftwaffe's high-altitude view, they were perfect, and that was the point. Inside British bunkers, one man watched the plan unfold. Colonel John Turner, former architect, now military illusionist. He had one mission: convince the Luftwaffe to waste its fire. In one classified report, Turner wrote, "We must give them a better target than the real one that screams from the sky, 'Destroy me.'" And the plan worked. Within weeks, bomb loads were diverted. Warehouses and fake leads burned bright, while the real city went untouched. Entire bomber formations struck blank hills, thinking they were power plants. Craters filled sheep pastures, not assembly lines. Even some German pilots began to whisper, "The cities are wrong. They don't fight back." In Hamburg, Luftwaffe analysts pored over film. Why did Bristol's factories survive? Why did London's port stay operational? They replayed footage, frame by frame. And then, someone noticed it. In the middle of an explosion site, a tree stood untouched. Not scorched, not broken, just gently lit by firelight. Artificial firelight. The analyst tapped the screen. Fake. Back in England, Colonel Turner reviewed the report. He smiled, then scrawled across the margin, "Next time, scorch the tree." The war had entered a new dimension, not of brute force, but optical warfare. The Germans dropped bombs, but Britain dropped illusions. And slowly, one side began to run out of truth. March 12, 1941. Luftwaffe Intelligence HQ, Brussels. The room was cold, maps covered in red pins, every city struck. A projector flickered, casting silent black and white images across the wall. Oberleutnant Felsmann sat with 6 others. Most were analysts. 2 were from propaganda. And one, Major Weiss, was not smiling. A reel began to play. Reconnaissance footage from the Sheffield raid. Frames ticked, bright impact, smoke plumes, glowing structures, then pause. "Enhance!" Weiss barked. The technician zoomed in. There, in the crater, a steel beam bent at a perfect angle. No rust, no support beneath it. Just a frame. Like scenery from a stage. Someone whispered, "It's not real." Another slide. A warehouse reduced to rubble. But its windows, painted on, and beside it, what appeared to be a downed power line. But when magnified, it wasn't cable. It was rope, tied between poles, unmoving, undamaged. Felsmann swallowed hard. "We've been bombing theater sets." No one laughed. Weiss turned slowly, his voice sharp as steel. "How long?" No one answered, because deep down, they all knew. The signs had been there, the patterns, the silence after strikes, the symmetrical fire, the reports that never matched, but they ignored them, because they couldn't afford the truth. The truth was this: for months, they'd been bombing ghosts. And the British had never tried to stop them. They lured them, fed them lies, light and fire, made the Luftwaffe waste fuel, men, time, and trust. Felsmann stared at the final frame. A perfect rail junction, smoking, glowing, cratered. But the tracks? They didn't connect to anything. They just ended in grass. He closed his notebook, wrote a single line. "We are no longer the hunters." Then he stood, saluted, and walked out. No one stopped him, because in that moment, even the proudest pilots understood. Britain was not breaking. It was tricking them into thinking it had. March 20th, 1941. A prisoner transport arrived at RAF Medmenham. Inside, 5 Luftwaffe crewmen, shot down over Kent. Among them was Felsmann, now stripped of rank, jacket folded over his arm, hands shaking, not from fear, but from realization. British intelligence officers didn't yell. They didn't threaten. They offered him tea. One man laid a folder on the table. Inside were photos, Dozens. Images taken from ground level. Not of real cities, but fake ones. "Recognize this?" the officer asked. Felsman stared. It was the same factory he'd struck outside Portsmouth. Only now. He saw the seams. The smokestack was a hollow tube, painted with ash. The warehouse roof? Canvas stretched over scaffolding. Even the roads were fake. Dirt lined with reflective tape to mimic headlights. Another photo showed a fire site, mid-operation. British technicians lighting barrels, spinning motorized mirrors, arranging fake ambulances, complete with hand-painted insignias. A full illusion, updated daily. All for him, for them. Felsman's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't just one city. It wasn't one trick. It was a machine. An empire of falsehood, woven by engineers, architects, even stage designers recruited from London's West End. One caption read, "Starfish Site Number 12, Operational 18 Yen, 1941. Diverted 73 bombers. 0 civilian casualties." The British officer leaned in. "We didn't stop you. We invited you. And you bombed exactly what we built." Felsman closed the folder. He whispered something in German. This is not war. This is theater." The officer nodded. "Exactly." Later, in his cell, Felsman stared at the cement wall. The Reich had promised dominance, total control, a 1,000-year order. But, in just one winter, his enemy had made him irrelevant. They didn't match German strength with force. They matched it with fabrication. What they lacked in firepower, they answered with illusion. And suddenly, the medals, the missions, the victories felt like nothing. He hadn't destroyed England. He had entertained it. And the applause was silent. Outside the cell, a British sergeant tapped a report. "Another one figured it out," he said. His commander smiled faintly. "Let them. That's the final blow." Before the raids, before the medals, before the firelight exposed the lie, Karl Felsman sat in a Berlin briefing room with 38 other pilots. A projector flickered. Maps of England, enemy silhouettes. Black and white footage of British civilians running for cover. A voice boomed overhead. "The Englishman is weak. He lacks resolve. He fears the night." Charts followed. Production numbers, naval strength, population density. All framed to say one thing: Britain cannot survive prolonged assault. They were told the Royal Air Force was crumbling. That morale was collapsing. That one final push from the sky would break their spine. A colonel had declared, "Strike the factories, and the island falls. Bomb the ports, and their empire dies." Felsman believed him. So did they all. They studied flight paths, not psychology. Payload weights, not human resilience. No one questioned the plan, because questioning meant doubt, and doubt meant death. In the mess hall that night, one young pilot joked, "Soon we'll be drinking English tea on Downing Street." Another laughed, "If the rats haven't taken it first." They thought it would be easy. They had the planes. They had the fuel. They had the Reich behind them. What they didn't have was the truth. Because the truth couldn't be measured in flight hours or targets hit. It lived in the stillness, in the fires that burned too clean, in the silence after the bombing. The truth wore a British uniform and held a torch under a painted building. And by the time the Germans saw it, really saw it, they were too far gone. They had flown too many miles to admit they'd never touched the real enemy. Only its reflection. In his cot that night, Karl remembered that colonel's words. "Bomb the ports, and the empire dies." He smiled bitterly. The ports had never burned. and the Empire, it was waiting. April 7th, 1941. One of the largest raids yet. Over 400 Luftwaffe bombers thundered toward Britain under clouded skies. The target, Newcastle, or so they believed. Inside his cockpit, Lieutenant Otto Riemann adjusted his course. His formation leader barked into the radio. Strike Zone C, oil depots, rail hub, all munitions, confirm impact. Below, light danced. Perfectly aligned, too perfect. Still, Otto obeyed. Payload doors opened. The bombs dropped. Impact. A wall of fire rose into the night. Secondary explosions flared. From the sky, it looked biblical. The crew cheered. Direct hit! But then the navigator looked again. Something was off. The fire didn't spread. It pulsed, as if controlled. Back at command, the film canisters arrived fast. Luftwaffe intelligence watched the footage in silence. One officer leaned forward, another zoomed. There, a train station with no tracks, a power line that didn't connect to the grid. Vehicles made of timber, painted black, stationary as stone. Someone cursed in German. It's all fake. The room went quiet. They replayed the footage frame by frame. In one corner, fire crews ran toward the blaze, but their shadows didn't shift because they weren't real. They were dummies, paper silhouettes rigged on pulleys, designed to be seen. Another officer muttered, "We bombed scarecrows." That night, an emergency meeting was held in Paris. Air Marshal Hugo Sperla stood in front of the Reich's top bombing tacticians. His voice was stone. "You think you've been striking Britain? You've been striking their art department." He held up a photo of a starfish site. The entire crowd went still. Canvas buildings, scaffolding towers, controlled fire rigs, painted roadways, a stage crafted in shadow. "This is what your bombs are hitting. Not steel, not engines, not weapons, but lies. Beautiful, devastating lies." One young officer choked on his breath. Another quietly asked, "Then what have we been doing?" No one answered, because they all knew. They'd lost more than men, more than fuel, more than time. They had lost certainty, the edge that made the Luftwaffe feared, and the British had taken it, not with guns, but with design. May 1945. The war was over. In the ruins of Berlin, Luftwaffe archives were seized. Folders, photos, memos, and questions. So many questions. But the real answers lay in the English countryside. It wasn't until 2 years later that a single classified file, once stamped most secret, made its way into daylight. Special Decoy Program, Operation Starfish. Inside were blueprints, hand-drawn diagrams of fake cities, nighttime illumination plans, fire simulation schedules. One page read, "Simulated factory fires, oil drums arranged in X pattern, timed ignition via remote charge, designed to appear like high explosive impact from 15,000 feet." Another, "False rail hub construction, painted tracks on black canvas, tin cars shaped with light wood, smoke generators hidden in crates." The program's architect, Colonel John Turner, a wartime magician who never wore a general's stars, just carried a ruler, a flare gun, and the patience of a predator. His goal was simple: feed the Luftwaffe a lie so believable they'd fight it instead of us. And it worked. By war's end, over 230 decoy sites dotted Britain, each one handcrafted to lure, absorb, and mislead. And they did. According to post-war British intelligence, over 730 Luftwaffe raids were diverted, 500,000 incendiary bombs wasted, civilian casualties reduced by tens of thousands. Entire raids, squadrons of elite German bombers, spent nights unloading on hills, fields, and cardboard cities. One declassified memo from MI5 concluded, "For every fire the Germans lit, we lit a better one." In an RAF interrogation room, Oberleutnant Karl Felsman sat with his hands folded. The British officer pushed a file toward him. Inside, photos of every site he had bombed, but now with ground-level views. One showed the Birmingham foundry he thought he had flattened, except it was a plywood box, with a ladder still leaning against the back. Another? A munitions warehouse that collapsed too neatly because it was meant to. Felsman didn't argue. He didn't cry. He just closed the folder and said, "You never tried to fight us. You just made us blind." The officer replied, "No, we let you fight ghosts until you ran out of real targets." By 1942, Germany's bombing strategy had shifted, not because they chose to, but because they had no choice. The skies over England held fewer lights, because the lights had lied. And those lies, they saved a nation. Felsman was transferred to a POW camp in Kent. He spent his days in quiet. No more briefings, no more medals, just birdsong and the distant hum of Spitfires overhead. One afternoon, a British officer brought him a cup of tea and a book on architecture. He opened it. Page 12, a full-color photo of a starfish site, rebuilt for post-war study. The caption read, "Decoy Town Number 4, saved 3,000 lives. No residents, no walls, just design." Felsman closed his eyes. He had once believed in power, in steel, in speed, in the myth that Germany's will could bend any enemy. But these people didn't bend. They designed. They turned war into theater, and theater into survival. He remembered his first sortie, how the fires danced in lines, how it all seemed too easy. And now he knew why. Because the British made it easy. So he would choose the wrong road, the wrong target, the wrong victory. One night in the mess hall, another POW whispered, "We weren't fighting the British. We were fighting ghosts." Felsman nodded. Not just ghosts, but the idea of a country that refused to fight the way we expected. They fought with patience, with math, with cardboard, and with a kind of courage that didn't wear a uniform. They knew they couldn't match the Luftwaffe's power. So they made something stronger, a lie that could protect the truth. After the war, Felsman returned to a broken Berlin. He never flew again, but he taught architecture, ironically. And once during a lecture on optical illusions, he paused. He told his students, "The most powerful weapon I ever faced wasn't a gun. It was an empty city, lit just right." They thought he was joking, but he wasn't, because he'd seen real power. Not in explosions, but in restraint. Not in destruction, but in design. Years later, on a tour of post-war England, a younger German historian visited a hillside near the town of Exeter. She'd heard the rumors of decoy towns, ghost railways, flickering fires that fooled the most feared air force in the world. At the edge of a field, overgrown and silent, she found it. Concrete shells, melted barrels, old scaffolding half buried in moss, and in the center, a steel plaque, weathered by rain and memory. On this ground, no one died, no homes burned, no children screamed. Here, a lie, saved lives. She stood in silence. The wind moved nothing. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. And she wondered, what is a victory that hits no one? What kind of mind chooses illusion over retaliation? What kind of nation builds not to kill, but to mislead? Karl Felsman died in 1983. He left no memoir, no glory. But in a letter found years after his passing, addressed to no one, he wrote, They beat us without bullets. They humiliated us without hate. They built nothing, and it broke us. Maybe that's the truest kind of power. The kind that doesn't have to fight, because it already knows how to survive. Today, few remember the Starfish sites. They weren't monuments. They weren't battlegrounds. They didn't win medals, but they saved lives. Thousands, maybe tens of thousands. Not by striking fear, but by outthinking it. If you had flown over England in 1941, would you have known? Would you have seen the seams in the light? The angles of the false fire? Would you have felt it? That what burned below wasn't real? Or would you, like Felsman, have smiled at the flames, never knowing you'd been played? What would you have done if you were him?